When we pulled that black trench door open, the first thing that hit me wasn't what I saw. It was what I smelled. Blood. Old blood, damp and sour, mixed with the smell of rust and wet earth. It clung to the air, heavy like someone had spilled it yesterday, even though the door hadn't been touched for years. I froze, one hand still on the iron handle, the other gripping the flashlight so tight my knuckles ached. Beside me, Mark muttered, "Jesus, what the hell is that?" His voice was low, but it cracked anyway, like he was trying to convince himself he hadn't noticed what I had. The trench had always been there, a concrete scar on the edge of the woods. People in town said it was just some old storm shelter left over from the war. Nobody ever went near it. My dad told me once when I was a kid to stay the hell away. He didn't explain why, just said some doors were better left closed. I thought he was just trying to scare me into keeping out of trouble. Now, standing there with Mark, I realized maybe he hadn't been lying. The door was heavier than it looked. Black steel, cold even in the summer air, with no lock, just a handle that felt wrong in my hand. When I pulled it open, the hinges groaned like something waking up after a long sleep. And the air that rolled out didn't feel dead. It felt alive, like it had been waiting. I shined the flashlight down the stairs. They went straight into the earth, concrete steps slick with moisture, disappearing into a dark that swallowed the beam. My stomach twisted. Every instinct I had told me not to go down there. But Mark laughed nervously and said, "Come on, man, it's just a basement. Don't wuss out." He pushed past me before I could stop him, his sneakers slapping the first few steps. The sound echoed down like he was walking into a hollow throat. I swallowed hard and followed. My light caught the walls, poured concrete, streaked with dark stains I didn't want to think about. The deeper we went, the colder it got. Not just cooler air, but bone-deep cold, the kind you feel in hospital morgues or walk-in freezers. I rubbed my arms, but it didn't help. By the time we reached the bottom, my breath was fogging in front of me. The trench opened into a room. Low ceiling, maybe 20 feet across, with pipes running along the top and dripping into puddles on the floor. My flashlight beam swept across broken chairs, rusted cans, and piles of rags that looked too much like clothing. In the corner, something scratched. I froze, aiming the light. A rat darted out, its wet body vanishing into a crack in the wall. I let out the breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Mark laughed, but it didn't sound real. Just rats told you. He kicked at a tin can, the clang bouncing around the room until it died in the dark. But then something else answered. Not an echo, not a rat. A sound, low and steady, like someone breathing. We both went still. My light shook as I raised it. The beam caught the far wall. That's when I saw it. Not blood splattered like in movies, not fresh. This was worse. Dark streaks soaked deep into the concrete, climbing up from the floor like the wall itself had been bleeding for years. Some spots looked almost black. Others shined wet like they never dried. I couldn't move. My throat felt tight. The sound came again, slow inhale, slow exhale, not ours. Too deep, too heavy. Mark whispered, "You hear that?" I nodded without looking at him. We both turned the lights toward the center of the room. At first there was nothing, just shadows, but shadows don't breathe, and this one did. The beam finally caught it, not a figure standing there, not fully, more like an outline in the dark, hunched low as if waiting. My stomach dropped. Every nerve screamed to run, but I couldn't. Neither of us could. The shape shifted just slightly, like it had noticed us. The breathing stopped, and that silence was worse than the sound. My flashlight flickered just once, then steadied. In that flicker, I thought I saw eyes, not glowing, just pale, like two circles of dull glass reflecting the beam back at me. "We should go," I whispered. Mark didn't answer. He was staring at the wall behind it, the stains. They weren't random. My light followed his gaze, and I realized the streaks weren't just splatter. They were words. Letters smeared in layers over and over again, scratched into the concrete with something sharp. One sentence repeated so many times the wall was almost black with it. "Don't open the door." My chest tightened. My dad's warning slammed back into my head. Some doors are better left closed. The breathing started again, louder this time, closer. Mark's voice was just a whisper, cracked and broken. "It's not empty." And then something moved in the dark, fast, too fast to follow. I stumbled backward, hitting the stairs with my shoulder. The flashlight beam spun across the ceiling, catching more stains, more words, and for a second what looked like handprints pressed into the concrete, too big to be human. The air shook like the room itself was inhaling. My heart slammed in my chest. Every instinct said, "Get out." I grabbed Mark's arm, yanking hard. Now, he didn't fight me. We ran, the sound of our steps swallowed by something behind us, heavier, closer. We didn't look back, not until we slammed the door shut above us, the iron echoing like a gunshot in the quiet night. And even then, standing in the dark woods, gasping for breath, I swore I could still hear it on the other side. Breathing. Slow. Waiting. We didn't talk much that night after running back from the trench. Mark sat on the hood of his car, chain-smoking, his hands shaking so badly he dropped the lighter twice. I leaned against the passenger side door, trying not to look at the black line of trees behind us. Every time I glanced at them, I thought I saw movement. Not branches, not wind, something else. Neither of us wanted to say it, but we both knew the same thing. There was something down there, something that wasn't supposed to be. I told myself we should just forget it, pretend it never happened. The door had been closed for years. It could stay that way, but Mark wasn't like me. He couldn't let it go. By the next morning, he was already calling me, his voice raw from lack of sleep. "We have to go back," he said. "We didn't really see it. We panicked. It was probably nothing." Nothing. That word burned in my head. Nothing doesn't breathe. Nothing doesn't write messages in blood on concrete walls. But I didn't say that. I just told him he was crazy. He laughed, but it wasn't his normal laugh. It was hollow, forced. By evening, he was at my door with his backpack slung over one shoulder. "We need proof," he said. "We bring a camera, maybe leave something down there, see what happens." I wanted to slam the door in his face, but the truth is, part of me wanted to know too. When you see something that breaks the rules of reality, it gets under your skin. You start to wonder if you really saw it or if your mind made it up. Curiosity is poison, and I was already infected, so we went back. The woods were darker this time, not just from the clouds rolling in overhead, but because we knew what waited at the end of the path. The trench door sat where we'd left it, heavy, black, wet with dew. My stomach twisted as I reached for the handle. It was cold again, too cold, like it had been sitting in ice. Mark pulled out his phone, the flashlight already on. "We don't go all the way in this time," he said. "Just the first room, we leave the camera, then we're out. Quick." I nodded, though my legs didn't want to move. The hinges groaned as we pulled the door open. The smell hit again, stronger this time, like the air inside had thickened overnight. Metallic, sweet, wrong. We stepped inside. The stairs were slicker, the concrete sweating like it had a pulse. My flashlight beam shook as I moved it down the walls. The words were still there. "Don't open the door," repeated over and over again. But now I noticed something we'd missed. Some of the sentences weren't finished. They stopped halfway, the letters smeared downward as if whoever wrote them had been dragged away mid-sentence. Mark didn't notice. He was too busy setting up the camera on the floor, a cheap little tripod, red recording light blinking like a tiny heartbeat. He angled it toward the far wall, toward the stains, as if that would capture the truth. That's when we heard it, a noise from deeper inside. Not breathing this time, a scrape, metal on stone, slow, steady, coming closer. Mark froze, crouched over the camera. His head turned toward the dark hallway that led deeper underground. "You hear that?" he whispered. I didn't answer. My mouth was too dry. The scrape grew louder, closer, like something dragging itself along the concrete floor. My chest tightened. My flashlight trembled as I raised it toward the hallway. The beam didn't reach the end, just darkness. Then it stopped. Silence. Mark stood slowly, his eyes locked on the shadows. "Maybe it's pipes," he said, but his voice didn't even convince him. I wanted to run. Every muscle screamed at me to bolt back up the stairs. But the silence held me there, pinning me like a hand pressing down on my chest. And then the breathing started again. Not from the hallway, from the room with us. My stomach dropped. My light swung wildly, bouncing off the wet walls, the dripping pipes, the stains, nothing, until it caught the corner. The rags we thought were clothes weren't just clothes, they were uniforms, torn, blood-soaked, folded over something solid. I realized too late it wasn't a pile at all, it was a body. Mark swore and stumbled backward, knocking the tripod over. The camera hit the floor, the red light blinking sideways, and as he did, the breathing grew louder. The pile moved, not all at once, just a twitch, a shoulder shifting under layers of cloth, a hand sliding out from beneath the heap, pale, wrongly bent. The fingers scratched against the concrete, nails broken, leaving fresh marks in the floor. Mark grabbed my arm. "Go." His voice was sharp now, not a whisper, a command. We ran, harder than before. I barely remember climbing the stairs, my shoes slipping on the wet steps. All I remember is the sound behind us. The dragging scrape again, faster now, closer, chasing us up. We burst through the door, slamming it shut, the iron vibrating in my hands. Mark threw his weight against it, holding it closed even though there was no lock. The woods were silent, too silent, but I swore I felt something pressing back from the other side. After a minute, nothing, no breathing, no scraping, just the thud of our hearts. Mark dropped to the ground, gasping. I stood there, staring at the door, waiting for it to move, but it didn't. When we finally walked away, neither of us said a word. But as we reached the tree line, I made the mistake of looking back. The door was still shut, but the camera wasn't with us. We'd left it down there, recording. And I swear, just before we lost sight of the trench, I saw the faintest red blink from the crack beneath the door. Still recording, still watching, still not empty. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it again, that dragging sound, like something too heavy to walk but too stubborn to stop. My sheets felt damp, my chest tight, as if the smell from the trench had followed me home. At 3:17 a.m., my phone buzzed. Mark. I almost didn't answer. But when I saw his name, I knew I had to. His voice was low, frantic. "We forgot the camera." "I know," I whispered, like saying it too loud would make it worse. There's something on it." I sat up straight in bed, the hair on my arms rising. "What do you mean, you went back?" "No," he said, his breath came fast. "The feed, my phone was still paired to it. I can watch the footage live." I went silent, my throat tightened, live. Mark didn't wait for me to answer. "Come over, now, bring coffee. I don't think I can look at this alone." When I got to his place 20 minutes later, he was sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, laptop open, phone in his hand, his face pale and sweaty. He didn't even look at me when I came in. He just pointed to the screen. The footage was grainy, black and white night vision. The camera had tipped sideways after Mark knocked it over, so the angle was low, crooked, half on the wall, half on the floor. At first, it was just the stains, the concrete, our footprints leading back toward the stairs. "Keep watching," Mark said, his voice cracked. A minute passed, two, nothing but static hum and darkness. I started to think he'd lost it, that we were just staring at a broken feed, and then it happened. The pile moved. At first, just the fingers again, twitching against the floor. Then the arm dragging itself into the camera's field of view. The hand was wrong, bloated, waterlogged. The skin stretched tight like it had been soaking for days, but it was moving. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. That's impossible." "Keep watching," Mark said again, softer this time. The rest of the body pulled itself into frame. The rags shifted. A face, if you could call it that, tilted toward the lens. Skin pale as chalk, eyes milky, mouth slack. No sound came from the video, but I swore I could hear it breathing in the room with us. It crawled forward, one arm dragging, the other scraping. The sound of nails tearing across the concrete must have been deafening in that room, even if the feed didn't pick it up. It got closer to the camera, too close, until its face filled the frame. I leaned back instinctively. Mark didn't move. He just stared wide-eyed as the thing's mouth opened. Not wide, not screaming, just opening, slow, like it was trying to say something. And then the feed cut to static. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "That's it, that's all." Mark shook his head. "No, watch." The static didn't stay. After a few seconds, the image came back, but the angle was different. The camera wasn't on the floor anymore. It had been moved, propped upright, facing the hallway that led deeper underground. I grabbed Mark's wrist. "That's not possible, it can't." "It did," he said flatly. The new angle showed the dark corridor stretching out into nothing. For a long time, nothing happened. My heart slowed, my breathing steadied. Maybe that was it. Maybe it was done. Then something walked past, not crawled, walked. A tall figure, too thin, its limbs slightly bent like the joints weren't connected right. It moved with this strange rhythm, too smooth, too quiet, its gray body barely registering against the camera's grain. It didn't look at the camera, didn't acknowledge it at all. It just walked down the hallway and disappeared into the dark. Mark's hands shook. That wasn't there when we were inside. I didn't answer. My mind spun, replaying every step we'd taken, every corner of that room. If that thing had been standing just a few feet further back, we never would have seen it, and it would have seen us. The feed flickered again. Another angle change. The camera now pointed back at the stairs. "Jesus Christ," I muttered. We both leaned in. The stairs were empty, just concrete, wet and glistening. But the longer I stared, the more I realized something was wrong. The words on the wall, "Don't open the door," they weren't the same. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I was imagining it. But no, the letters were different, newer, and they didn't say the same thing. They said, "Why did you come back?" My stomach dropped. Mark pushed the laptop away like it had burned him. "It knows," he whispered. "It knows we were there." The feed flickered again. For half a second, the image warped, stretched like the lens itself was being pulled, and then nothing, just static. Mark closed the laptop with a snap. The silence in the room was unbearable. I could still feel the thing's face pressed close to the screen, those milky eyes staring into mine. I finally broke it. "We have to get that camera." Mark shook his head violently. No way, we go back, we don't come out." "Then what? Just leave it. Leave proof of what's down there. What if someone else finds it? What if—" I trailed off, realizing I didn't have the words. "What if it comes out?" Mark lit another cigarette with trembling hands. We shouldn't have gone back, we should have listened. To what? I asked. He looked at me, eyes red-rimmed. The rules. And for the first time since we opened that door, I saw something in him I'd never seen before. Not fear, not even panic. Resignation, like he already knew how this story ended. I didn't go home after that night. I stayed on Mark's couch, not because I wanted to, but because every time I thought about being alone in the dark, I imagined those milky eyes watching from the corner of my room. We didn't talk much. Mark chain-smoked until the ashtray overflowed, and I stared at the ceiling, replaying the footage over and over in my head. At some point the sun came up, but it didn't bring relief. The light felt thin, sickly, like it was afraid to really come inside. By late afternoon, I couldn't take the silence anymore. I stood up and said the words I'd been holding back all morning. We need to go back. Mark didn't look at me, just flicked his lighter again, his hands trembling as the flame caught. No, we already made it out once. That's more than anyone gets. If we leave that camera, it doesn't just stay down there. It's like it's watching us now. You saw it move. You saw what it showed us. Mark finally looked up, and for a second I thought he'd throw me out, that he'd tell me to shut up and never come back. Instead, he crushed the cigarette into the glass tray so hard it cracked, then muttered, "If we go, we don't go at night, and we don't go unprepared." That was as close to a yes as I was going to get. We spent the rest of the day gathering things that felt more like talismans than tools. Extra flashlights, a crowbar, bottles of water, even an old baseball bat Mark kept in his garage. Nothing really felt like enough. As dusk settled, the air outside grew heavy, as if the world itself knew where we were heading. We drove in silence, headlights cutting through the thickening dark, the road leading us back to the same abandoned trench, the same rusted door we should have left sealed. The smell hit us before the concrete did, a sour stench of mold and iron that crawled down the back of my throat. My stomach twisted, but I forced my feet forward. Mark carried the crowbar, I carried the flashlight, and together we pulled the heavy door open again. The same wet scrape echoed through the night as the hinges groaned. Inside, the air was colder than before, thick with moisture. I aimed the beam of my flashlight down the stairs, and the words on the wall froze me in place. They weren't the same as the night before. The letters had changed again, fresh, wet strokes dripping down the concrete like blood. This time it said, "You brought IT back." My skin went ice cold. I whispered, "What does that mean?" Mark shook his head violently. "Don't ask, don't say it out loud." But the words clung to me, burrowed into my chest. We descended slowly, each step a gunshot in the silence. The camera wasn't where it had been. The corner was empty, the floor bare, my pulse quickened. "It moved it again," I muttered, sweeping the light across the walls. That's when I saw it, half buried in a pile of damp cloth near the far wall. Mark yanked it out, dusted it off, his face pale as he powered it down. "It's still warm," he said. My stomach churned. That shouldn't have been possible. As we turned toward the stairs, I noticed something else, something worse. More words scrawled unevenly across the wall where the stains had once been, different from the rest. Jagged, angrier, "Don't look up." My breath caught. Instinct made me tilt my head before I could stop myself, and when I did, I saw them. Dozens of pale faces pressed against the ceiling, their features melted, their mouths wide and silent, eyes milky and fixed on us. They weren't painted. They weren't shadows. They were there, crawling across the concrete like insects. I stumbled back, the flashlight shaking in my hand, the beam catching their twitching fingers as they dragged themselves across the surface. Mark grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise. "Don't look. Just don't." Move." His voice cracked on the last word. We bolted up the stairs, the sound of our footsteps drowned out by something else, scraping, dragging, like hundreds of fingernails clawing across the concrete behind us. The door slammed shut with a metallic bang as we burst outside, gasping for air. My lungs burned, my vision blurred, but the relief of fresh air hit like a drug. Mark dropped the camera onto the ground between us, his chest heaving. "It's not just a place," he rasped. "It followed us out. It wants us to see it." I stared at the trench door, heart pounding, and in that moment I knew he was right. The rules weren't just warnings scratched into the walls. They were commands. And now we'd broken more than one. When we got back to Mark's house, neither of us wanted to touch the camera. He left it on the kitchen table like it was something toxic, something that might bite if we got too close. For a while we just sat there, staring at it, neither of us willing to break the silence. The house was quiet, but it didn't feel safe. It felt like the quiet was waiting for something. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I gripped a mug of coffee so hard the ceramic almost cracked, but it didn't help. Every time I blinked, I saw the words in my head again. "You brought IT back." I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just talking about the camera. Mark finally broke the silence, his voice low, raw. "We can't keep it here." "Then what do we do?" I asked, my throat dry. "Burn it." He shook his head violently. "What if that makes it worse?" He ran a hand over his face, smearing the ash from his cigarettes. "We need to see what's on it. Maybe it'll tell us what it wants." My stomach dropped. "You're insane." But he was already moving. He plugged the camera into an old laptop, the screen flickering to life. At first it showed nothing but static white noise hissing in the dark room. Then slowly shapes began to form. The trench, the stairs, the exact same angle as before, like the camera had been watching us even when we weren't near it. I leaned forward despite myself, my breath caught in my chest. The footage sped up, the perspective jerking, flickering from corner to corner. Then it froze. The image on the screen wasn't the trench anymore, it was Mark's kitchen. The same kitchen we were sitting in right then. The same table, the same chairs, except we weren't in it. The chairs were empty, the table was bare, the house looked lifeless, cold. Mark cursed under his breath and yanked the cable out, slamming the laptop shut. "That's it. We're done. We're taking it back tonight." But the words had barely left his mouth when the lights flickered. Just once. A quick, sharp blink, enough to make my heart jump. Then again, longer this time, leaving us in darkness for a full second before buzzing back to life. We didn't speak. We didn't move. Then the sound came. Faint from the living room. A soft scrape like nails against wood. My chest tightened as Mark grabbed the baseball bat, motioning for me to stay quiet. We stepped into the living room slowly, the floor creaking under our weight. The sound stopped. The room was empty. Nothing moved, nothing looked out of place. But on the far wall, near the ceiling, the paint had darkened. Streaks, long and vertical, trailing down like something wet had dragged its fingers across the surface. I whispered before I could stop myself. It followed us. Mark turned on me, his eyes wild. "Shut up, don't give it words." But it was too late. I could feel it in the room. Not see it, not hear it, but feel it, like the air was too heavy, pressing against my skin. We backed into the kitchen, the camera still sitting there on the table like bait. I wanted to throw it out the window, smash it, anything to be rid of it, but my body wouldn't move. It was as if the camera was holding me there, waiting. That's when it turned on by itself. No one touched it. No one pressed a button. The screen lit up, glowing in the dim light, and the footage rolled again. This time there was no trench, no empty house, no static. It was us. sitting in the kitchen just minutes earlier, staring at the camera. Except in the footage, something else was in the room with us, behind us, standing in the corner by the fridge. A figure in gray, tall and thin, its head tilted too far to one side, its face blurred like the camera refused to capture it clearly. My blood ran cold. I whipped around, flashlight beams slicing through the kitchen, but the corner was empty. The figure wasn't there, not anymore, but the footage kept playing. In it, the figure slowly raised one hand and pointed, not at us, but at the door leading to the basement. Mark slammed the laptop shut again, his breathing ragged. "That's it, we're taking it back now." He grabbed the crowbar and stuffed the camera back into his bag, his movements frantic, almost desperate. I tried to argue, but the words stuck in my throat. Deep down, I knew he was right. Whatever this thing was, it wanted us to follow. And the longer we waited, the more it made itself at home. We drove back to the trench in silence, both of us too scared to say what we were thinking. The air outside the car felt wrong, heavy, like static before a storm. When we reached the door again, the smell was worse than ever, sour and sharp, burning the inside of my nose. Mark pried the door open with the crowbar, his arms shaking. The metal screamed as it gave way. Inside, the walls weren't just damp anymore. They were slick, wet, and the words were back. Fresh, bright, dripping down the concrete in strokes too fast to follow. "IT knows your names." I stumbled backward, my heart hammering so loud I thought my chest would split open. The flashlight slipped in my hand, beams swinging wildly across the walls. Mark's voice broke the silence, low and hoarse. "It's not the trench, it's us. We're the ones it wants. We didn't sleep that night." The words on the trench wall, "IT knows your names," stayed burned into my head, echoing with every beat of my pulse. Mark kept pacing the kitchen, lighting cigarette after cigarette, though his hands shook so badly he could barely bring them to his lips. The house felt wrong, too still, like the walls themselves were waiting for something to happen. I sat with my back against the wall, staring at the basement door. I hadn't looked at it this much in years, but now I couldn't take my eyes off it. It felt like if I glanced away, even for a second, something would slip out. At around 3 a.m., when the silence had grown unbearable, we heard it. 3 knocks, slow, heavy, coming from the front door. We froze. Mark's cigarette ash spilled onto the floor, forgotten in his trembling fingers. He whispered, "Don't move." Another knock, louder this time, rattling the frame. My body went rigid, every instinct screaming at me not to answer, but the sound didn't stop. Knock, 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 measured, deliberate, like whoever or whatever was out there knew exactly how much time to leave between each strike. Mark grabbed the bat again, nodding at me to stay behind him. We moved toward the door together, each step making the floor creak like thunder in the dead silence. My heart pounded so hard it made my vision blur. When we reached the entryway, Mark hesitated. His hand hovered over the knob. The knock stopped. We stood there holding our breath. Then came the whisper, faint like it was pressed against the wood. "Mark." His name, spoken in a voice that sounded like his mother's, though she'd been dead for years. I covered my mouth, fighting the urge to scream. The whisper came again, a little louder this time. "Open the door." Mark's grip on the bat faltered. I could see his knuckles whitening as he tried to steady himself. "It's not her," I hissed, but my voice cracked. He nodded, jaw tight, but he didn't move to open it. Then the voice changed, deeper. Wrong, my name, drawn out, almost mocking. "Come out." We staggered backward, away from the door, as the knock started again, furious this time, rattling the frame so hard I thought the hinges would snap. The whole house seemed to shake with it, pictures sliding crooked on the walls, dishes rattling in the cupboards. And then silence. The air felt vacuumed out of the room, leaving a ringing in my ears. We didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe. Slowly, almost reluctantly, Mark reached for the peephole. He bent forward, pressed his eye against it. I waited, my chest tight, praying he wouldn't say anything. His whole body went rigid. He stumbled back, his face pale, eyes wide like he'd seen something that stripped him hollow. His voice cracked. It was me, staring back at me, but older. My stomach turned. I couldn't process it, couldn't wrap my head around it. What do you mean older? He shook his head violently. It was me, but not me, and it smiled. My knees almost gave out. We backed into the kitchen again, clinging to each other like children. The camera sat on the table, the black lens still turned toward us, silent, waiting. I couldn't stand it anymore. I grabbed it with both hands and screamed, "What do you want from us?" My voice broke the stillness like glass shattering. For a second, nothing happened. Then the screen blinked on. No one had touched a button. No one had powered it. The footage rolled again, shaky and distorted, but clear enough to recognize the view. The front door, our front door. The same knocks we just heard, captured in eerie detail. Except this time the camera angle was wrong. Too high, like it was filmed from the ceiling, looking down on us as we huddled near the entryway. And in the footage, standing just behind us, was the man in gray. His face was still blurred, but closer now, his outline sharp against the dark. Watching, always watching. Mark slammed the laptop shut so hard the screen cracked. His breathing was ragged, desperate. It's inside already, it doesn't need the door. My skin crawled. I wanted to run, to get out of that house, to leave everything behind, but something held me there. Some sick pull, like the trench wasn't just a place anymore. It was tethered to us, dragging us down inch by inch. Then from the basement we heard it, the faintest creak of a stair, as if someone or something was coming up. The first creak from the basement step froze us both. It was so faint, I almost convinced myself I imagined it, but then came another. Slow, deliberate, one at a time, like someone testing their weight on the stairs. Mark gripped the bat so tight I thought the wood would splinter in his hands. My body locked, every instinct telling me not to move, not to make a sound. We stared at the basement door together, waiting for the handle to turn. But it didn't. The steps just kept coming, steady, unhurried, as if whoever was down there knew we had nowhere else to go. By the fifth step, Mark whispered, "It's counting." His voice was hollow, shaky. I wanted to ask what he meant, but I didn't need to. The sound wasn't just movement, it was deliberate, a rhythm. One step, pause, two steps, pause, like someone marking time. My stomach churned. I realized my breathing was too loud. Every inhale felt like it echoed off the walls. I clamped a hand over my mouth, pressing until my lips hurt. The seventh creak came, then silence. Too much silence. We waited. 1 minute, 2. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring, that fills your head with the sound of your own blood rushing. And then the basement door handle twitched, just once. Enough to rattle against the latch. I nearly screamed, but Mark shook his head violently, mouthing, "Don't." The handle stilled, and after a long beat, a low groan came from behind the door. Not human, not animal. It was the kind of sound you hear when old wood warps, except layered with something that made your skin crawl, like words you couldn't quite make out, buried in the tone. Mark raised the bat, ready to swing, but I grabbed his arm. "Don't open it," I whispered, though my throat was so dry the words barely came out. He nodded, but his eyes stayed locked on the door, unblinking. Suddenly, the house seemed to shift. The air pressure changed, like the basement was breathing. A draft crawled up through the cracks in the door, icy cold, carrying with it the smell of damp soil and rust. My stomach turned. That smell didn't belong to our house. It belonged to the trench, the one we should never have opened. The lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely, plunging us into darkness. My heart slammed in my chest as I fumbled for my phone, the faint glow of the screen casting weak light across the room. Mark's face was pale, sweat dripping down his temples. "It wants us down there," he whispered, and I knew he was right. Every creak, every shift, every whisper we'd heard, it was pulling us back to the trench. And for the first time, I felt the horrible truth sink in. Whatever we had woken wasn't trapped below anymore. It was rising. We backed away slowly, step by step, until our backs pressed against the far wall of the kitchen. The basement door rattled once violently, then went still again. My phone buzzed in my hand, a notification. At first, I thought it was just a random alert, but when I looked down, my blood ran cold. It was a video message from my own number, with the timestamp marked 2 minutes into the future. My hand shook as I tapped it open. The screen showed me and Mark sitting exactly where we were, bat in hand, phone in my grip. Only in the video, the basement door was open, wide, and something was crawling out. Long arms, too long, bent wrong. And in the dim light of the video, I saw a face. Not Mark's, not mine, but something caught between us. A blur of features that shifted like wet clay, forming and unforming as it dragged itself up the steps. Mark ripped the phone from my hand and hurled it across the room, smashing it against the wall. The screen went dark, but the sound lingered. A distorted static that seemed to come not from the phone, but from the house itself, from the basement. The door groaned again, and this time I swore I heard my name in it. A whisper pulled through wood and nails, forcing its way into my head. My knees buckled. I pressed my hands against my ears, but it didn't help. It wasn't outside anymore, it was in me. Mark staggered forward like he was being pulled, bat slipping from his grip. His eyes glazed, fixed on the basement door. "Don't," I begged, clutching at his arm. "Don't go near it." He blinked like coming out of a trance, then shoved me toward the hallway. "Upstairs, now." His tone left no room for argument. We stumbled up the staircase together, 2 steps at a time, as the sound of the basement latch clicked below us. By the time we reached the top, I risked a glance back. The basement door was open just a crack, just enough for a sliver of blackness to leak out, darker than the rest of the house, like the absence of light itself. And as we stood frozen in the upstairs hallway, a new sound followed us, fingers. Long nails dragging slowly along the underside of the wooden stairs, scraping closer, step by step. We slammed the bedroom door shut and shoved the dresser in front of it, the old wood screeching across the floor. My chest heaved, lungs straining like I'd just run miles, but the truth was the fear had done all the running for me. Mark leaned against the dresser, trying to catch his breath, sweat dripping down his chin, but his eyes never left the door. Neither did mine. For a long moment, all we heard was silence. Then the scraping came again, nails, claws, whatever it was, running along the wall beneath us, following the frame of the house as if mapping where we were. I felt the vibrations through the floorboards, faint but deliberate, like it wanted us to know it could reach anywhere it pleased. I whispered, "What the hell is it?" My voice cracked, barely audible, but Mark just shook his head. "It's not supposed to be here," he muttered, almost like he was reminding himself, like saying it out loud might make it true. But it was here. The trench had followed us, pulled itself inside our house like a parasite, and now it was climbing closer. The bedroom felt wrong too. I didn't notice at first, but the air was stale, heavier than it had ever been. The smell of the trench clung to the curtains, the sheets, even our clothes, thick and suffocating. And worse, the room was colder. Not the kind of cold you feel when the heater breaks, but a deep, sinking cold that spread through bone and marrow. I wrapped my arms around myself and stepped back until my shoulders hit the far wall. That's when I saw the cracks. At first, I thought they were just part of the old plaster, hairline splits we'd ignored for years. But these weren't normal cracks. They spread in jagged, unnatural patterns, veins crawling across the walls and ceiling, blacker than shadows, pulsing faintly as though something alive was just behind them, pressing to get through. My stomach dropped. "Mark," I pointed, unable to finish. His eyes followed and his face went pale. He moved closer, hand trembling as he reached toward one. Before I could stop him, his fingertips brushed the surface and the wall shivered like skin. He yanked his hand back, cursing under his breath. A faint smear of red stained his fingers, blood fresh and slick, as if the wall itself was bleeding. Then came the whisper, not from the hall, not from below, from the cracks themselves. My name over and over, distorted like a record playing backward. Mark's name too, slurred, stretching longer each time, as if savoring the sound. I pressed my hands to my ears, but it didn't matter. The whispers didn't live in the air, they lived in my head. The lights flickered once, then died again. Only the pale glow of the moon through the curtains lit the room, faint enough to turn everything ghostly. Mark grabbed the bat from where he dropped it earlier and stood guard near the dresser, shoulders squared like he could fight this thing off. But I saw it in his eyes. He knew he couldn't. None of us could. The scratching on the walls grew louder, circling the room, moving faster until it sounded like claws racing just beneath the plaster. Then silence, complete, suffocating silence. We held our breath, straining to hear. That's when the floor dipped, just slightly, but enough for both of us to feel it. The boards beneath the carpet groaned, sagging under invisible weight. Something was here in the room with us, but we couldn't see it. Mark swung the bat wildly into the empty air, but it only cut through nothingness. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would break my ribs. Then the moonlight shifted, catching the corner of the mirror on the wall. That's when I saw it. A figure standing behind me, tall, too tall. Its body stretched, head nearly scraping the ceiling, its arms dangling unnaturally long, hands dragging against the floor. Its face, God, its face, was nothing but shifting blur, features sliding in and out like wet paint, sometimes resembling Mark, sometimes me, sometimes something else entirely. I spun around, but there was nothing there, just the room empty. But in the mirror it stayed, watching, leaning closer. I stumbled back, tripping over the bed frame, landing hard against the floor. Mark dropped to his knees beside me, gripping my arm. "Don't look at it," he hissed, but my eyes were locked on the mirror, on the thing inside it. Its head tilted, slow and unnatural, until it hung at a grotesque angle, almost upside down. And then, with a motion that made no sense, it stepped forward through the reflection, pressing itself against the glass like it was testing the boundary. The surface rippled, not breaking but bending, warping outward like liquid. Mark yanked me to my feet, dragging me toward the far side of the room. The whispers grew louder, filling every corner, the cracks throbbing in rhythm with the thing's movements. And then the glass gave. Not shattering, opening. The mirror bulged outward, a slick black arm pushing through, fingers clawing the air, dripping with thick, dark liquid that smelled like rust and earth. I screamed, pulling away, but the whispers turned into words, clear for the first time. "Let me in." The dresser rattled behind us as if something else pressed from the hallway, and the walls groaned with pressure, plaster flaking off in chunks. We were trapped. No matter which way we turned, something was waiting. The mirror figure lurched further, half its body free now, dripping onto the carpet with sounds like wet cloth hitting the floor. Mark raised the bat, swung with all his strength, and the mirror exploded into shards, scattering across the room. The thing collapsed with it, dissolving into nothing but black sludge that hissed as it soaked into the cracks. For a moment, we thought it was over. Then every shard of the broken mirror lit up faintly, like tiny screens, each reflecting not us but the trench, dark and endless with dozens of faces staring back. And all at once, in perfect unison, they whispered again, "We're already upstairs." The shards of the mirror still glowed faintly on the carpet, each one whispering in a voice that wasn't quite human. We tried not to look, but it was impossible. Every piece reflected not us, not the room, but the trench, dark water stretching forever, faces pressed against the surface like they were desperate to escape. Some of the faces looked familiar, too familiar. I saw my father's profile in one, my grandmother's in another, both of them long gone, their eyes begging, their mouths moving without sound. I tore my gaze away and pressed my back against the far wall, fighting the urge to vomit. Mark crouched near the shards, bat still clutched tight, his knuckles white. "Don't look at them," he said, though his own eyes flicked back again and again, drawn like a moth to flame. But then the whispers stopped, all at once. The silence hit harder than the noise, heavy and suffocating. That's when the knock came. Not the frantic pounding from before. This was slow, deliberate. 3 knocks. A pause, 3 more. It came not from the hallway door we had barricaded, but from the window. My heart seized. We were on the 2nd floor. Mark turned his head slowly, eyes wide, as the knocks repeated. 3 sharp raps against the glass, then a pause, like whoever it was wanted us to know they weren't in a hurry. They had all night. I forced myself to look. A man stood outside the window. His suit was gray, perfectly pressed, like something out of an old photograph. His tie hung neatly, his shoes gleamed even in the pale moonlight. He looked wrong in the way a wax figure looks wrong, human-shaped, but too smooth, too polished. His face was pale, skin stretched tight, and his eyes, God, his eyes were black, not dark, black. Empty. He lifted one hand, gloved in the same gray, and knocked again. Calm, patient, waiting. "Jesus Christ," Mark whispered, gripping the bat tighter, but I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The man smiled, just barely, and then I realized he wasn't standing on anything. He was floating. His polished shoes hung just above the sill, inches from the glass, his body suspended in the air like gravity didn't apply to him. He leaned closer, pressing his forehead gently to the window, fogging the glass with a breath that should not have existed. Then he spoke, and though the window stayed shut, his voice slid into the room as if the glass wasn't there at all. "You opened the door," he said, his voice low and smooth, like a funeral director trying to soothe grieving relatives. "Now it's mine." Mark raised the bat as if that could protect us, but the man only chuckled, the sound thin and hollow. The cracks on the walls pulsed again, matching the rhythm of his words, and the shards of glass on the carpet began to vibrate, their whispers returning, all of them repeating the same phrase in 100 voices. "It's his now. It's his now." My legs finally obeyed me, and I stumbled forward, grabbing Mark's arm. "Don't look at him," I hissed, but it was too late. Mark was staring, frozen, his body trembling as if every muscle had locked. The man outside tilted his head, studying him like a specimen, then slowly raised his other hand. A thin black line formed across the window, spreading outward like a spider web. The glass didn't shatter, it peeled. Layer by layer, it peeled back like wet paper, curling outward, opening, and the man in gray began to step through. His foot crossed first, landing soundlessly on the carpet. His suit didn't wrinkle, his shoes didn't mark the floor. He moved with the smoothness of something that had practiced being human but never quite got it right. My throat went dry. He stood fully in the room now, tall and composed, as if he'd been invited inside. His eyes swept the space, pausing on the broken mirror shards, then back to us. "This house," he said calmly, "has been waiting for me." He smiled again, wider this time, though it didn't touch his eyes. "You kept the rules for so long, but rules change." I dragged Mark backward, desperate to break his gaze, but the man's presence filled the room like smoke, seeping into every corner. He didn't chase us. He didn't need to. He just stood there, watching, his head tilting slightly whenever we moved, like a predator that already knew the hunt was over. Then he spoke again, softer this time, almost tender. "Once you see me, you can't unsee me. I live here now, upstairs, downstairs, inside." His words pressed against my skull, heavy and undeniable. I squeezed my eyes shut, but I could still feel him, like heat on my skin, like the smell of the trench still clinging to my clothes. The lights flickered, and when I opened my eyes, he was gone. Just gone. But the room wasn't empty. The cracks on the walls had spread wider, the whispers louder, and the shards of the mirror now showed only him. Dozens of reflections of the man in gray, all smiling, all waiting. Mark collapsed to his knees, dropping the bat, his shoulders shaking. "It's over," he muttered, his voice broken. "He's already in." And I knew he was right. The trench wasn't outside anymore. It wasn't beneath us. It was here in the house, wrapped in a suit the color of ash, polite and patient, smiling like he'd been invited. The house felt different after he left. Not quieter, no, silence would have been a blessing. It was heavier, like the air itself had thickened, pressing against our lungs with every breath. Mark hadn't moved from the floor since dropping the bat. He sat hunched, staring at nothing, mumbling the same words over and over. "He's already in. He's already in." I wanted to shake him, scream at him, drag him out of that trance, but the truth was I didn't feel much different. The man in gray was gone, yet every shadow in the room leaned his way. Every corner stretched a little too long, as though the house itself was reshaping to fit him. That was when I noticed the notebook. It had slipped from the shelf near the bed, landing open on the carpet. At first, I thought it was just another journal left behind by the old tenants, but the pages were fresh, the ink still wet. My stomach twisted as I picked it up and read the first line. "The rules have changed." I froze. The handwriting wasn't mine, wasn't Mark's, wasn't anyone I recognized, but it looked deliberate, steady, like someone had been waiting for me to find it. I flipped the page and found more lines, each one numbered. They weren't the rules my family had passed down. These were different, twisted. Rule 1, you must look at the man in gray when he knocks. If you don't, he will come anyway, but angry. Rule 2, do not cover the mirrors. They are his doors now. Rule 3, at night leave the lights off. He doesn't like to be seen in the brightness. Rule 4, if you hear footsteps behind you, keep walking. If you stop, he will stop too, and then he will wait forever. Rule 5, do not leave the house. The trench has spread. I slammed the book shut, my pulse hammering. Every single one of these rules was the opposite of what we'd been told our whole lives. My grandmother had drilled them into me. Cover the mirrors, keep the lights on, never answer a knock. Now it was all reversed, and the worst part was I didn't know which set to trust. Mark finally looked up, his face pale, eyes hollow. He must have read them too. "He's rewriting it," he whispered. "He's making his own rules." My hands shook as I clutched the notebook. "So what the hell are we supposed to do? Follow his rules or ours?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. We both knew there was no safe choice. That night we tried to stay awake, but exhaustion pulled us under anyway. I woke first, not to a noise but to the absence of one. The whispers in the walls were gone. The mirror shards were still, their surfaces blank. For a moment I thought maybe, just maybe, it had ended. Then I heard the footsteps, soft, even, coming down the hallway just outside our door. I gripped Mark's arm, shaking him awake. "Don't stop moving," I hissed, remembering the new Rule 4. We pressed ourselves to the far wall as the footsteps reached the door, paused, then continued past, slow and deliberate. The boards creaked, then fell silent, but the silence wasn't empty. It was waiting. Mark's breathing quickened. "If we don't follow these, he'll kill us." His voice cracked. "But if we do follow them, what does that make us?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My eyes kept darting to the mirror shards, and that's when one of them shifted, just slightly. A piece by the dresser slid an inch to the left, scraping across the carpet as if something beneath it had pushed. I leaned closer, against every screaming instinct, and saw my reflection, only it wasn't me. My face moved, but the timing was off, like bad lip syncing. Then it smiled, wide and wrong, even though I wasn't smiling. My chest tightened. Mark grabbed my wrist. "Don't look, you'll invite him in." But I couldn't pull away. The reflection leaned closer until its lips brushed the glass from inside. "The old rules kept him out," it whispered. "These new ones bring him home." My knees buckled. The shard slipped from my hand and landed face down. But the whisper still rang in my ears, clear as if spoken right beside me. We huddled together, trying not to breathe too loud, but the house wouldn't let us forget. The cracks on the walls pulsed faintly, like veins carrying something alive. The notebook sat on the floor between us, its cover trembling, pages flipping as though invisible fingers turned them. More rules appeared, written in that same steady hand, one after another. I couldn't look away. Rule 6, do not trust the voices that call you by name. They are his rehearsals. Rule 7, when you see him in gray, do not hide. Pretend you belong to him. Rule 8, there is no Rule 8. By the time you read this, he is already inside. The final words blurred as if they were still wet. I wanted to scream, to tear the pages out, to burn the whole damn thing, but deep down I knew it wouldn't matter. The rules weren't instructions. They were inevitabilities. Not warnings of what to avoid, announcements of what was already happening. Mark pressed his palms against his temples, rocking slightly. "We're not following rules anymore," he said. "We're following a script, and he's the one writing it." The lights flickered again, then cut out entirely. We were left in darkness so thick it pressed against our skin. I held my breath, waiting for the whispers, the footsteps, anything. But the sound that came was worse. A slow inhale right behind us, and then the smooth, patient voice we already knew too well. "Good, you're learning." We thought we had seen the worst of it. We thought that after the notebook, the shifting mirrors, the breathing in the dark, there was nothing left he could do to us that would surprise us. But that night, after the voice whispered, "Good, you're learning," the air went still in a way that made my bones ache. The silence pressed so heavy it felt like the walls themselves were listening. Mark and I sat frozen, neither daring to move, both waiting for the next step we knew was coming. And then it came, but not from the hallway, not from the mirrors, not even from the ceiling. It came from below. 3 steady knocks, hollow and deep, rising up through the floorboards beneath us. We both jumped back instinctively, but the sound followed, echoing again, then again, each time louder, closer, as if something was climbing up from the foundation of the house itself. My chest tightened. I knew immediately where it was calling us. Apartment 3B, the one place in this house we had both sworn never to enter again. Mark shook his head violently, whispering, "No, no, we're not going back there." But the house had other plans. The notebook flipped itself open again, pages flapping until they stopped on a new rule written clean and bold in black ink. Rule 9. When he knocks from below, you must answer in 3B. My throat went dry. There was no choice. Every time we ignored him, things got worse. Every time we fought the rules, he found another way in. I grabbed Mark by the arm, my hand trembling. "We have to," I whispered. He looked at me like I'd already lost my mind, but I saw the same truth flickering behind his eyes. We were trapped in someone else's game. The hallway felt longer than it ever had before as we crept toward 3B. The floor creaked under our feet, the wallpaper peeling in long, curling strips, as though the house itself was shedding its skin. The air grew colder with each step, our breath puffing out in white clouds even though the thermostat upstairs still read 72. By the time we reached the door to 3B, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely twist the knob. The door swung open with no resistance, as though it had been waiting for us. Inside, the room looked nothing like it had before. The clutter, the broken furniture, the dust, it was all gone. The space was bare except for the single black door against the far wall. The black trench door. It pulsed faintly like it was breathing, its surface rippling with a darkness too deep to be paint, too deep to be wood. Just looking at it made my stomach lurch like I was staring over the edge of a cliff and the ground was tilting beneath me. Mark's voice cracked as he whispered, "It's bigger." And he was right. The door was taller than before, stretching toward the ceiling, its frame widening as if the house itself was reshaping to fit it. We both stood frozen, every instinct screaming to run, but then the knocking came again. 3 heavy thuds, this time from inside the trench door. The sound rattled the walls, shook the floor beneath our feet, and I knew we couldn't leave. I forced myself forward, each step dragging like lead, until I stood just inches from the door. My reflection shimmered faintly on its surface, distorted as though I was being pulled down into the dark. And then, without warning, the door cracked open, not all the way, just enough for a thin sliver of black to spill into the room. The air whooshed out like a vacuum, pulling at my clothes, at my hair, like something on the other side was trying to drag me through. I staggered back, grabbing for Mark, but he was already rooted to the floor, eyes wide, lips moving in silent prayer. A voice seeped through the crack, smooth and patient, the same one that had haunted our nights. "You came back. Good. You follow the rules well." The gap widened just enough for a pale hand to slip through, fingers long and thin, skin stretched too tight over the bones. It pressed against the floor, nails scratching slow circles into the wood, and then withdrew just as quickly. The voice chuckled softly. "Not yet, but soon." The door slammed shut with a force that rattled the entire building. Dust fell from the ceiling, cracks spread along the walls, and the air felt heavier, thicker, almost impossible to breathe. I collapsed to my knees, gasping, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. Mark dropped beside me, gripping my shoulder. "We can't do this anymore," he whispered. "We're not surviving this. He's changing everything." Before I could answer, the notebook slid across the floor toward us, pages opening again. A new line etched itself onto the paper in front of our eyes. Rule 10. Once you open the trench door, it will not close for you again. My blood ran cold. That meant it hadn't closed, not really. We staggered out of 3B, slamming the apartment door shut behind us, but the truth clung to me like smoke. The black trench door was awake now, and it wasn't going to stay hidden. As we stumbled back toward our own room, the walls groaned, a low rumble shaking through the building like something massive was shifting beneath it. Mark leaned against the wall, his face pale, eyes hollow. "We're not in control anymore," he said flatly. "He's riding every step, and now we're just walking into his story." I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him we still had a chance, but deep down I knew he was right. The rules weren't just changing, they were consuming us. And the worst part was, we weren't the ones surviving the generations anymore. We were just the next chapter. I didn't sleep that night. Neither did Mark. We sat in the living room with the notebook between us, too afraid to close it, too afraid to leave it open. Every time the pages rustled, I thought it was going to write again, and every time it stayed still, I found myself almost praying it would, because silence in this house was always worse. By dawn, the air had shifted again. You could feel it in your lungs, like breathing underwater. And then, right when the sun touched the blinds, the notebook opened on its own. The pen scraped across the page even though no hand held it. A new rule appeared, slow and deliberate. Rule 7, never leave anyone alone in the house after dark. The words sank into my chest like ice. My brain immediately started spinning, searching for meaning. Was it telling us that one of us would die if we split up? That something would take the one left alone? Mark read the line 3 times, his lips barely moving, before he finally looked at me. It means we can't ever be separated at night, not even for a minute. His voice cracked on the last word. The day crawled by in an anxious blur. Every sound, every creak in the house felt amplified, like the walls were testing us, waiting for darkness to fall. I kept checking the clock, dreading what would happen when the sun went down. By evening, I was pacing the floor, my skin crawling like ants were under it. Mark tried to keep calm, but I could see his hands trembling when he poured coffee, hear the quiver in his breath when the pipes moaned in the walls. We both knew we weren't ready for whatever was coming. When night finally bled across the windows, the house seemed to exhale. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied, but dimmer, like the bulbs were fighting to stay alive. We stayed together, side by side, clinging to the new rule like it was a lifeline. For hours, nothing happened. Just silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. And then just past midnight, the first test came. The front door rattled, the knob twisting as if someone was trying to come in. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Mark grabbed my arm, pulling me back from the hallway, but the rattling grew louder, more violent. Whoever or whatever was outside wanted in. We didn't move. We didn't answer. And then a voice muffled through the wood, soft and childlike. "Please let me in. I'm scared." My stomach flipped. It sounded like a little girl, no older than 10. Her voice cracked with tears. Every instinct in me screamed to open the door to help, but Mark's grip tightened like iron. "It's him," he whispered. "Don't you dare." We stood there, paralyzed, as the voice sobbed, pleaded, begged us to open. Then, after a long silence, it whispered one last line that chilled me to the bone. "If you don't, she'll be alone tonight." We both jerked toward each other, panic rushing in. Was it a trick? Or was there really someone out there? If there was, didn't that mean we were already breaking Rule 7 by leaving her outside? My heart pounded so hard I thought I'd faint. Mark shook his head violently, whispering, "Don't. It's bait." But my feet were already moving, dragging me closer to the door. And then, right as my hand touched the knob, the notebook snapped open on the table. The pen scraped furiously, scrawling new words so quickly the ink bled through the page. I ran back, my chest heaving, and read it. Rule 7 is not about them. It is about you. The knock stopped. The voice outside vanished. The silence returned, thick and final. Mark let out a shaky breath, his whole body sagging in relief. I stared at the notebook, bell rising in my throat. He wasn't warning us about strangers. He was warning us about ourselves. He wanted us to stay trapped together like animals in a cage. And worse, he was telling us he could make us doubt each other at any second. The night dragged on, every shadow stretching longer, every sound crawling beneath our skin. At one point, the light in the kitchen flickered, and I swore I saw a figure standing at the edge of the room, gray and shapeless, watching us. Mark said he didn't see it, but his voice was too tight, too strained, like he was lying just to keep me from breaking. By the time the first hint of dawn touched the blinds, we were both wrecks, eyes bloodshot, bodies trembling, nerves raw. But the house wasn't finished with us. Just before the light could fully break through, the notebook opened again. Another line written right beneath the last. Rule 7 cannot be broken twice. My heart plummeted. What did that mean? Did it mean one mistake was allowed, but the second would kill us? Or had we already survived our one chance by ignoring the girl at the door? Mark closed the notebook slowly, his hands trembling. He's setting us up, he whispered. He's making sure next time we won't survive. I didn't argue. I couldn't. The truth was pressing in from every angle. The rules weren't meant to protect us anymore. They were narrowing, tightening like a noose. We were being funneled towards something, step by step, night by night. And I knew with a cold certainty that hollowed me out inside that when we reached the end, it wouldn't be survival waiting on the other side. By the next night, the house no longer felt like a house. It felt like a trap, a waiting mouth that we were stuck inside of. The rules had tightened, and now every step, every word, every breath felt like it was being measured. Mark and I tried to stay calm, tried to move through the day like normal people, but there was no normal left. Not after Rule 7. Not after the notebook told us it wasn't about them, it was about us. That night, the first sign came from the walls. At first, I thought it was the pipes again, groaning the way they always did when the heat kicked on. But the sound wasn't metal, it was wet. A low, squelching pulse, like something thick was forcing its way through the plaster. I froze in the hallway, my hand brushing against the wall, and I felt it vibrate, not with the hum of water, with a steady, sickening thump-thump like a heartbeat. "Mark," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Come here. Touch this." He pressed his palm against the wall, then ripped it back immediately, his face pale. "It's warm," he said, barely audible. We both stared at the wallpaper as it began to darken, slow at first, then faster, spreading outward in blotches. Red seeped through, trickling down in thin rivulets. It wasn't paint, it wasn't rust. The smell hit us before the sight fully registered, metallic, sharp, thick, blood. The walls were bleeding. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. Mark tried to say something, but his voice cracked into silence. The blood didn't just drip, it pushed. It poured, streaming from cracks and seams, filling the grooves of the floorboards. And then, as if that wasn't enough, words began to form in the stains, dragging themselves across the surface. We watched in horror as letters appeared, crooked and jagged, written in crimson. "The house remembers." My knees nearly buckled. Mark grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in. Both of us too terrified to move. The house remembers what? Us. The rules, the lives it had already taken. I didn't want the answer, not really, but the walls didn't care what I wanted. They kept bleeding, kept spelling, until more words spread across the hallway. "You broke it once. You will break it again." Mark shook his head violently. "We didn't break anything," he He shouted, but his voice sounded hollow, weak, like he was trying to convince himself. I pulled him back into the living room, away from the spreading stains. But the smell followed us, thick and choking. And then, right on cue, the notebook opened again on the table. The pen scratched furiously, ink blotting the page. Rule 8 will be written in blood. I couldn't breathe. The pages stayed blank after that line, the pen dropping to the floor as if whatever force had guided it was done. But I knew what it meant. The next rule wasn't going to appear in ink. It was going to appear in the walls, the floor, maybe even in us. The night dragged on, every hour stretched thin by the smell, the sound, the constant awareness that the walls were alive. At one point, Mark swore he heard whispers inside them like voices buried in plaster, begging to be let out. I pressed my ear close against my better judgment, and for one awful second I heard it too. A man's voice, muffled, rasping. "Help me, please, it's so dark." I reeled back, clutching my head, shaking until my teeth chattered. It wasn't just the two of us in the house. It never had been. The house was full of them, every wall stuffed with whispers, with blood, with the memories of everyone who had broken the rules before. Near dawn, the bleeding slowed, congealing into black streaks that hardened like veins across the plaster. Mark and I sat on the couch, unable to look away, waiting for it to stop. When the last drop hit the floor, the silence returned, but it wasn't relief. It was worse. It was the silence of something that had just fed, something that was waiting to digest. As the light broke through the windows, I dared to open the notebook again, praying for clarity, even if it terrified me. The page was blank except for one new line scrawled at the very bottom, small and faint, as if written in a hurry. "The house bleeds for those it keeps." I slammed it shut, my hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped it. Mark buried his face in his palms, whispering over and over, "We're not getting out. We're not getting out." And for the first time since the rules began, I didn't argue. Because deep down, I was starting to believe it too. Morning did nothing to ease the terror. The house was too quiet, too still, like it was holding its breath. Mark and I barely spoke, afraid that even sound might trigger whatever waited for us inside those walls. But silence wasn't safety, it was bait, and we both knew it. By noon, the blood on the walls had dried into black streaks, jagged like veins crawling across the plaster. I tried not to look, but it was impossible. Every time I walked past, I felt them twitch, like they weren't stains at all but scars, alive and flexing under the skin of the house. I thought I imagined it until Mark stopped dead in the hallway and whispered, "They're moving." I didn't want to admit he was right, but I saw it too, the black veins pulsing faintly, a slow rhythm, the same heartbeat we'd felt the night before. That was when the notebook slid off the table. It didn't fall, it moved as if shoved, hitting the floor with a loud crack. The cover flipped open, the pages ruffled, and words began to appear, written in thick red strokes that smeared across the paper. This time it wasn't ink. The letters bled into the page, dripping as if the paper itself had been cut open. "Eighth rule, when the house bleeds, you must feed it." Mark's voice broke, his laugh sharp and desperate. "Feed it what?" He kicked the notebook across the floor, but it only slid to a stop at my feet. The words didn't vanish. They spread. Blood for blood, flesh for flesh. I shook my head, backing away. No, we're not doing this." My chest tightened until I thought I'd choke. The air felt heavier, pressing down like the walls were closing in, and I swear the dried blood streaks grew darker as if the house was listening, waiting. That night the knocking returned, not at the door this time, from inside the walls. Slow, deliberate thuds like fists pounding through plaster. Mark grabbed a chair and pressed his back against it, his face white. "It wants us to open it," he whispered. "It wants out." I covered my ears, rocking back and forth, but the sound grew louder, closer, until flakes of plaster rained down from the ceiling. I could hear voices now, muffled cries, dozens of them, all whispering the same word over and over. Hungry, hungry, hungry. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed the notebook, shaking it as if it would answer me. "What do you want from us?" I screamed. The pages flipped violently, stopping on a single sentence scrawled in fresh red lines. "The house remembers every debt, pay or be consumed." Mark's eyes went wide. He looked at me, then at the walls, then at his own hands. "It wants us," he said, "one of us." I screamed at him to shut up, but the idea sank in like poison. The house had survived for generations by feeding. Someone always had to pay. That was why the rules existed, not to protect us, but to control when the house fed. And now it was starving. The pounding stopped. The silence was worse. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, just sat there clutching the notebook until my knuckles turned white. Then, just as I started to believe it might be over, the black veins on the wall split open. A wet tear spread across the plaster, and from it a single drop of fresh blood slid down. Then another, then another. Mark stumbled back, gagging. "It's starting again," he whispered. I couldn't move. My legs felt nailed to the floor as the crack widened, spreading up toward the ceiling. And then, written in the blood as it poured, "Choose or the house will." The words dripped, seeping across the floorboards like veins branching toward us. I screamed, throwing the notebook into the fire, watching as the pages curled and blackened. But even then, the words didn't stop. They burned themselves into the walls, into the ceiling, into the floor beneath our feet. "When the house bleeds, you must feed it." Mark sank to his knees, clutching his head, rocking back and forth. "We're dead," he muttered. "We're dead either way." I grabbed him, shaking him hard, forcing him to look at me. "No," I said, my voice raw. "We're not feeding it. We're not giving it what it wants." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed myself. The blood kept spreading, crawling closer like it was alive, like it could smell our fear. And then from deep inside the walls came a sound I'll never forget. A low, guttural moan, rising into something almost human, almost words. Hungry. The house had spoken. And for the first time, I understood what the rules were really for. They weren't warnings. They weren't protection. They were bargains. The house didn't just take, it demanded. And now it was our turn to decide what to give. By dawn, the house no longer looked like the one we'd stepped into days ago. The walls were splitting open in jagged seams, the black veins no longer hiding under plaster but stretching across ceilings, floors, even over the windows. Every crack leaked a slow ooze of blood, thick and dark, carrying a smell so raw it turned my stomach. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was alive, breathing, pushing itself apart like something inside was trying to be born. Mark and I barely slept. Every time we closed our eyes, the pounding in the walls came back, sometimes fists, sometimes scratching, sometimes the faint scrape of nails dragging down the inside of the plaster. At one point, I swore I felt fingertips brushing against my shoulder as I lay in bed, even though no one else was in the room. I bolted upright, gasping, only to see a fresh crack spreading down the wall beside me, the blood dripping faster than before. We met in the kitchen, both of us pale and shaking, neither daring to talk about what the house was demanding. The notebook was gone, burned to ash, but its rules didn't die with it. They burned themselves into us, into the walls, etched into every dripping crack. I couldn't walk 10 steps without seeing those words in red. When the house bleeds, you must feed it. The worst part, the cracks weren't just in the walls anymore. They had started to crawl into the floorboards. That morning, I stepped into the hallway and nearly twisted my ankle when one of the boards gave way. Peering through the gap, I saw something I wish I hadn't, an eye staring back at me from the darkness below. It blinked once, slow and deliberate, before vanishing. I stumbled back, screaming, and Mark came running. He saw nothing when he looked, but the wood was damp, as if something beneath had pressed against it, leaving a wet, bloody outline of a face. We tried to leave again. God, we tried, but every door we touched split apart in our hands, collapsing into rotten wood that turned to ash before our eyes. The windows weren't windows anymore, just walls pretending, smeared with a sheen of something thick that reflected our faces in warped, twisted shapes. The house wasn't keeping us inside with locks. It was keeping us inside by erasing the way out. Mark broke then. He punched the wall until his knuckles split, screaming at it, demanding it let us go. The house didn't answer with words. It answered with a crack that tore through the ceiling, raining chunks of plaster onto the floor. Through the opening, we didn't see rafters or sky. We saw teeth, rows of them, long, yellow, grinding teeth lining the edges of the split, as if the house had grown a mouth and was testing how wide it could open. Mark froze, his bleeding fists trembling at his sides. "It's going to eat us," he whispered. "That's what feeding it means." I grabbed him, shaking my head, refusing to believe. No, there has to be another way. But even as I said it, the house groaned, its voice deep and wet, rattling through the walls, hungry. That was when the photographs changed. We hadn't noticed them before, family portraits, old and yellowed, lining the stairwell. But now, as we climbed, every picture shifted. The faces of the ancestors blurred, their eyes bleeding black, their mouths stretched into grimaces of pain. And then slowly, the faces became ours. My own eyes stared back at me from the glass, my mouth twisted open in a silent scream, blood running down my cheeks. Beside me was Mark, only his image was worse. His throat already split, his body sagging like a puppet with cut strings. I ripped the picture off the wall, but behind the frame wasn't plaster. It was skin. Raw, twitching skin, wet and warm to the touch. It pulsed under my palm. I dropped the frame and staggered back, gagging. The cracks widened further, spreading with loud snaps like bones breaking. The staircase sagged under our weight, the railings bending and dripping with blood. I knew then what the house was doing. It wasn't just opening cracks, it was preparing. It was widening itself, making room. That night the voices returned, not whispers this time, screams. Hundreds of them echoing from beneath the floors and inside the walls. Mark covered his ears, rocking back and forth, but I listened. And through the chaos, one voice cut through clear as a bell. "Don't let it choose, you must choose." I spun, searching for the source, but there was no one. Just the walls trembling as the cracks widened, blood pouring like rivers. The house shook, groaned, and I realized something that nearly stopped my heart. If we didn't feed it soon, it wouldn't just take one of us. It would take both. Mark met my eyes then, his face pale but determined. "It's me or you," he said flatly. "And I don't think it's going to wait much longer." The house answered with another groan, louder this time, as one of the largest cracks split open the floor between us, revealing a chasm that wasn't empty. Inside it was flesh shifting and writhing, as if an entire pit of bodies had been sewn together and left to squirm. Hands clawed upward, reaching for us, blood-slick fingers grasping the edges of the boards. The smell of rot hit me so hard I doubled over, gagging. Mark grabbed my arm. "We have to decide, now." But I couldn't. I wouldn't, because choosing meant giving in, and giving in meant letting the house win. My chest heaved, tears burning my eyes as the floor shook beneath us, the cracks widening further, threatening to swallow us whole. And that's when the voice returned, clearer this time, right against my ear though no one stood beside me. "If you don't choose, the house will." I screamed because I knew it was true. The cracks weren't just widening anymore. They were waiting. The house was no longer holding itself together. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, it was splitting wide open, every wall torn with black dripping cracks. The floor heaved under our feet as if breathing. Blood seeped through the boards, pooling in sticky rivers that flowed toward the basement door. It wasn't just alive anymore. It was starving, and it was ready to be fed. Mark stood across from me, his face pale and streaked with sweat, his eyes wild but resigned. "It's us," he said, his voice barely audible over the groaning of the beams. "It's always been us, the family. The house doesn't survive unless one of us gives it what it wants." I shook my head violently, refusing to hear it. "No, we can fight it. We don't have to follow the rules." But even as I said it, the words rang hollow. The rules weren't suggestions. They were law, and they had been written in blood long before I was born. Generations had survived because they obeyed, because someone always gave themselves up when the house demanded it. That was the last rule, the one never spoken, only understood. One must die so the rest can live. The walls screamed as another crack tore across the ceiling, raining dust and plaster. When I looked up, I saw something that froze the blood in my veins. Faces. Not painted, not carved, but real. Thousands of faces writhing in the plaster, mouths open, eyes wide in agony. They weren't decorations. They were the ones who had fed it, our family, all the generations before us. My grandmother, my great-grandfather, every sacrifice trapped inside the walls, their pain echoing forever. The house shuddered again, and a voice, low and guttural, shook the air. "Choose." Mark stumbled toward me, his hand reaching out, but I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't asking me to decide. He was offering himself. He was ready. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him not to, but my throat closed up. The truth was carved into the marrow of my bones. I couldn't do it. I couldn't take his life, but he could take his own. Before I could move, Mark pulled away, stepping toward the widening crack in the center of the floor. From below, hands reached for him, bloody, clawing, desperate hands of the house's hungry maw. He looked back once, his eyes soft despite the horror around us. "If I don't, it'll take you, and I can't let it." I lunged, screaming his name, but the floor buckled beneath me, throwing me to my knees. My fingers scraped the boards as I crawled toward him, but I was too slow. He stepped into the crack, and the house swallowed him whole. The scream that tore through the walls was like nothing I'd ever heard. It wasn't Mark's voice. It was the house's. It roared in triumph, the walls convulsing as blood poured faster, soaking the floor, running down the stairs like a flood. I thought it was going to collapse, that it would tear itself apart. But slowly, horribly, the cracks began to seal. The mouths closed. The blood receded. The house sighed, low and satisfied, like a beast after a feast. And then silence. I staggered to my feet, shaking, tears burning my face. His name tore from my throat over and over, but he was gone. The floor where he had stood was whole again, not even a trace of blood left. Only the faint outline of his face appeared in the plastered wall, eyes wide, mouth twisted in eternal agony, joining the others. That was the moment I understood. The house never gave. It only took. And it would keep taking, generation after generation, unless someone broke the cycle. For a long time, I just stood there in the silence, listening to my own breath, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down on me. And then faintly, I heard the scratching of a pencil. I turned and saw the notebook, impossible, burned to ash days ago, sitting pristine on the table. Its pages were blank, waiting. With shaking hands, I opened it, and there it was, written in fresh, dripping ink. Rule 9. When the house is fed, the survivor must write the rules again. I dropped the notebook as bile rose in my throat. That was how it kept going. That was how it lasted centuries. Every time someone survived, they rewrote the rules, sealing the curse, binding it tighter. And now it was my turn. I should have run. I should have burned it again. But when I looked at the wall, when I saw Mark's face trapped in that plaster, I knew I couldn't. My hand reached for the pen almost on its own, and I wrote. Line after line, I copied the rules, each stroke carving them deeper into me, into the house. My tears blurred the ink, but the words came anyway, steady, inevitable, unstoppable. By the time I reached the last rule, my hand was no longer mine. The house was guiding it. Rule 10, the last one must always stay. The pen fell from my fingers and I felt the walls closing in. My chest tightened. I stumbled back, staring at the words, knowing exactly what they meant. I wasn't leaving, I couldn't. The house had chosen me as its keeper, the one who stays. I screamed until my throat tore, clawing at the door, pounding the walls, but nothing opened. The house was whole again, quiet, patient, waiting for the next generation to return. And in the silence, I heard a knock at the door, slow, measured, expectant. I froze, my breath caught in my chest, because I knew it wasn't the house. It was the next one, the next in line, my blood, my family, coming home. And when they opened the door, I would be here, waiting, just like all the others before me. Because that was the last rule.